A Pair of Schoolgirls by Angela Brazil. Chapter V. A Literature Exercise. The fickle goddess of fortune, having elected to draw together the lives of Dorothy Greenfield and Alison Clark, had undoubtedly begun her task by sending the latter to live near Coleminster. Mrs. Clark told all her friends that it was by the merest chance she had seen and taken Lindenley. She had decided that the climate of Lemstead was too relaxing, and when, on a motor tour with a cousin in the north, she happened to pass through the village of Latchworth, and noticed the pretty, rambling old house to let on the top of the hill, she had at once insisted upon stopping, obtaining the keys, and looking over it. And she had so immediately and entirely fallen in love with its pleasant, sunny rooms and delightful garden that she had interviewed the agent without further delay, and arranged to take it on a lease. "It's the very kind of place I've always longed for," she declared, "old-fashioned enough to be picturesque, yet with every modern comfort, a good coach house and stable, a meadow large enough to keep a Jersey cow in, a splendid tennis court, and the best golf links in the neighbourhood close by. Another advantage is that Alison can go to Avondale College. The house is so near to the station that she can travel by train into Coleminster every day, and return at 4 o'clock. I'm ever able to make up my mind to spare her to go to a boarding school, but, on the other hand, I don't approve of girls being taught at home by private governesses. The college exactly solves the problem. No one can say I'm not giving her a good education, and yet I shall see her every day, and have her all Saturday and Sunday with me. It's no use possessing a daughter unless she can be something of a companion, and I always think nature meant a mother to bring up her own child, particularly when she's a precious only chick like mine." Alison had no memory of her father, who had died in her infancy. Her mother had been as both parents to her, and had supplied the place of brothers and sisters as well. Poor Mrs. Clark could not help fussing over her one treasure, and Alison's education, amusements, clothes, and, above all, health, were her supreme interests in life. The girl was inclined to be delicate. She had suffered as a child from bronchial asthma, and though she had partly outgrown the tendency, an occasional attack still alarmed her mother. It was largely on Alison's account that Mrs. Clark had taken Lindenley. She thought the open, breezy situation on the top of a hill likely to suit her far better than the house at Lemstead, which had been situated too close to the river, and she knew that the neighbourhood of Coleminster was considered specially bracing for those troubled with throat or chest complaints. At 14 Alison was one of those over-coddled, petted, worshipped only daughters who occasionally, in defiance of all ordinary rules, seem to escape becoming pampered and selfish. She had a very sweet and sensible disposition, and a strong sense of justice. In her heart of hearts she hated to be spoilt or in any way favoured. She would have liked to be one of a large family, and she greatly envied girls with younger brothers and sisters to care for. Dearly as she loved her mother, It was often a real trial to her to be idolized in public. She was quick to catch the amused smile of visitors who listened while her praises were sung, and the everlasting subject of her health was discussed, and to detect the disapproval with which they noticed her numerous indulgences. She felt it unfair that strangers, and even friends, seemed to consider her selfish for receiving all the good things showered upon her. She could not disappoint her mother by refusing any of them, though she would gladly have handed them on to someone less fortunate than herself. To her credit, she never once allowed her mother to suspect that this over-fond and anxious affection made her appear singular, and occasionally even a subject of ridicule among other girls. She submitted quite patiently to the cosseting and worrying about her health, only sighing a little over the superfluous wraps and needless tonics, and wishing, though never for less love, certainly for less close and fretting attention. Perhaps as the direct result of this adoration at home, Alison was a pleasant companion at school, quite ready to give up her own way on occasion, and enjoying the sensation of sharing alike with everyone else. She was soon on good terms with her classmates, for she was merry and humorous as well as accommodating. Her friendship with Dorothy increased daily. As they travelled backwards and forwards by train together, they were necessarily thrown much in each other's company, and they earned the nicknames of David and Jonathan in the form. The contrast between the circumstances and the upbringing of the two girls could not, however, have been stronger. Miss Sherborne, in adopting Dorothy, had undertaken a charge that was a heavy if self-imposed burden upon her small means. Rigid economy was the rule at Holly Cottage, no luxuries could be afforded, and pleasures were mostly of a kind that did not involve any great expenditure. It was rarely that Aunt Barbara indulged herself even to the extent of a concert ticket or a piece of new music. A fresh piano was out of the question, so she managed to coax a good deal of melody from the old one. If it had not been for the help of her writing, she could not have sent Dorothy to the college, and, as it was, such extras as dancing lessons were impossible. Though Dorothy clearly understood the necessity for economy, she often secretly chafed against it. She was a girl who liked to shine before her schoolfellows, and she felt keenly that she lacked their advantages. It was hard, when all were talking of a play or an exhibition, to have to confess that she had not been, and to hear the others say pityingly, "Why, Dorothy, you never go anywhere." Her clothes, made by Aunt Barbara at home, though beautifully neat and quite sufficient for a schoolgirl, could not compete with the pretty dresses worn by many of her companions, and she did not possess even a watch, much less bangles and chains such as Hope Lawson was fond of displaying. The knowledge of her dependent position, which Aunt Barbara had so carefully kept hidden, came to her as the most serious of her drawbacks. She could not help brooding over it, and the more she dwelt upon the subject, the more disconsolate and discontented she became. Aunt Barbara, whose loving eyes were quick to notice, saw only too clearly the phase through which Dorothy was passing, but she knew that the girl must fight her own battle before she learned to set the right value on this world's possessions, and to discover for herself what things are really of worth. With Dorothy's character, Miss Sherborne often felt as though she were working in the dark. She did her best to impress her own personality upon the child, but every now and then some unexpected trait, a legacy, perhaps, from an unknown ancestor, would crop up and make her realize how strong is the force of heredity in our natures. She recognized that at the present crisis preaching would be useless, and could only trust that patience and forbearance would indirectly bring about the desired effect. "Auntie," said Dorothy, as she ate her breakfast one morning, about a month after the term began, "I don't like Hope Lawson since she got the wardenship. She hasn't improved." "How's that?" "I thought she was a tolerably nice girl," answered Miss Sherborne. "She wasn't at all bad before, but she's changed. She and Blanche Hall and Irene Jackson go together now, and they simply sit upon all the rest of the class. Rather a large order, if they do it literally," laughed Aunt Barbara. "Metaphorically, of course. But really, Auntie, you've no idea how nasty they are. Hope has taken the tone that she's much above everyone else. I don't mean because she's warden, but socially. You see, while her father has been mayor, they've entertained numbers of distinguished people, and Hope's never tired of talking about them. Then she comes to school wearing heaps of bangles and rings and things, and she makes one feel she doesn't consider one's clothes anything to hers. She saw my blue skirt had been lengthened, for she nudged Irene and laughed, and said very pointedly that braid had gone out of fashion. Then she asked me where I bought my boots. I wasn't going to tell her, so I didn't answer, but Blanche Hall piped out, "The market stores," and they both screamed with laughter, and Hope said she always bought hers at Forster's. I should simply take no notice, if I were you. I try not to, but all the same it's annoying. Yesterday we had a squabble about giving out the French books, and I said I should ask Miss Pittman. Then Hope said Miss Pittman would be sure to take her part, because she often dines at their house. And the worst of it is, it's true. Miss Pittman isn't quite fair. Hope and Blanche and Irene make the most tremendous fuss of her, and she always favors them, she does really. She gives them better marks for their exercises, and easier questions in class, and waits much longer for their answers than for anybody else's. She doesn't like me. Dorothy. She doesn't, honestly, Auntie. Even Allison notices how down she is on me. If I do the least little thing, I'm napped up in a second. Then the obvious moral is, don't do the least little thing. I'm not going to bring her flowers every morning, and offer her walnut creams in the interval, she thought. It seems like bribery, and I should think much better of her if she wouldn't accept them. Miss Hardy never did. Miss Hardy, the mistress of the lower fourth, had been strict but scrupulously just. She might be sometimes disliked by her pupils, but she was always respected. Miss Pittman was a totally different type of teacher. She was younger, better looking, dressed more prettily, and cared very much more for the social side of life. She lacked power to enforce good discipline, and tried to supply her deficiency by making a bid for popularity among her girls. She dearly loved the little attentions they paid her. She liked to pin a rose on her dress, or carry home a bunch of hothouse flowers. She found tickets for concerts or lectures most acceptable, and invitations, provided they were to nice houses, were not despised. Probably she had not the least idea that she was allowing her predilection for some of her pupils to bias her judgment of their capacities in class, but in the few weeks that she had taught the upper fourth she had already gained a reputation for favoritism. "She can be so particularly mean," said Dorothy, continuing the recital of her grievances to Allison in the train. "She deliberately helped Blanche out with one question yesterday, and she wouldn't give me even the least hint." "I don't like her myself," commented Allison, "though she isn't as hard on me as she is on you. But it's perfectly easy to see what's the matter with Miss Pittman. She's ambitious to climb. She wouldn't accept the Parkers' invitation. They only live in a semi-detached villa, and she's been twice to the Lawsons, who send her home in a motor. Well, she won't be asked to our house. Nor to ours, though I don't suppose she'd want to come. All the same, it's disgusting, and I've a very poor opinion of her." That morning Miss Pittman took her classes without her ordinary adornment in the way of a buttonhole. Hope Lawson was absent, and the delicate Mary Chalneal or dainty spray of carnations that usually lay on her desk at 9 o'clock was absent also. Perhaps she missed it, for she was both impatient and snappy in her manner during the lessons, waxed sarcastic when Noel Kennedy demanded an explanation of a rather obvious point, and made no allowance for slips. She dictated the history notes so quickly that it was very difficult to follow her, and woe to Dorothy, who was rash enough to ask her to repeat a sentence. "Are you deaf, Dorothy Greenfield? Sit up and don't poke. I can't allow you to stoop over your desk in that way. If you're short-sighted, you had better go to an oculist and get fitted with glasses." Dorothy was apt to poke, and her attitude when writing was most inelegant, but it is difficult to remember physical culture during the agonies of following a quick dictation. She frowned and looked thunderous as she made a jerky effort to sit straight. "Miss Pittman's crosser than usual," she said to Allison at 11 o'clock. "You'll see, I shall only get moderate for my literature exercise, however well I do it." "You mean she'll mark it low on purpose?" "Yes. She never judges me fairly." "But does she look at the names on the labels when she's correcting?" "You may be sure she does, or Hope wouldn't always have very good dot." "Then, just as an experiment, let us exchange. I'll write my exercise in your book, and you can write yours in mine. Our writing's sufficiently alike." "Oh, that would be a gorgeous joke." "We'll do it, but don't tell a soul." Let us go upstairs and arrange it now. Dorothy wrote her literature exercise that morning in the book labeled Alison Clark. She had prepared her subject carefully, and did her very best not only to put down correct facts, but to attend to points of composition. She tried to avoid tautology, unduly long sentences, and various other mistakes to which she was prone, and flattered herself at the end of the half hour that she had turned out a decidedly creditable piece of work. She blotted it with great satisfaction, and by rather officiously collecting the books of several girls who sat near, and placing hers in the middle of the pile, she managed to hand it to the monitress without showing the incriminating Alison Clark on the cover. There was a singing class from 12 to 12.45, during which time Miss Pittman always did her corrections. When the girls rushed up to the classroom at 1:15, the books were finished and placed ready upon the table. Alison and Dorothy each seized her own, and retired together to a corner of the room. "You've got fair in my book," whispered Dorothy. "Now let me see what I've got in yours." "Excellent." "Fiddlesticks." "Well, look for yourself." "It actually is." "Oh. Miss Pittman would never have given me excellent if she'd known it was mine. I feel I've scored no end. Doesn't it show her up?" "Rather." Excellent was the very highest mark possible, and it was rarely given at the college. To receive it was certainly a great honor, and showed the merit of the exercise. The two conspirators thought they had been extremely clever, and congratulated themselves upon the success of their little plot, but it was to have a sequel which neither of them expected in the least. Miss Tempest taught literature throughout the school, and though she delegated the correction of exercises to assistant mistresses, she occasionally made some enquiry about the written portion of the work. That afternoon she entered the upper fourth classroom. "I wish to know the results of your literature exercises," she announced. "I myself set the paper this week, and I want to see what standard you have reached individually." Will each girl in turn repeat her mark, beginning with Noel Kennedy? Dorothy was in a quandary. She did not know what she ought to say. Must she give the mark that was written in her book, or the one she had really gained? Justice seemed to point to the latter, so when it came to her turn she answered excellent. Alison, taking the cue from her, answered fair. Evidently the exercises had not reached a very high standard of merit that day. There were a few goods, a great many moderates and fairs, and even one or two weaks and faulties. At the end of the recital the headmistress was just about to give her comment, when Miss Pittman intervened. "May I say a word, Miss Tempest? One girl has not stated her mark correctly." Dorothy Greenfield said excellent. "Now I particularly remember that I only gave one excellent this morning, and that was not to Dorothy." Miss Tempest turned to Dorothy with her sternest look. "Repeat your mark," she ordered. "Excellent," quavered Dorothy, sticking to her point. though she foresaw a storm. "Hand me your exercise." Dorothy fumbled in her desk with trembling fingers. She knew she was involved in a most awkward situation. She was very pale as she passed up the book. Miss Tempest opened it and glared first at the fair, written plainly in Miss Pitman's handwriting, and then at the embarrassed face of her pupil. "I should not have thought you would consider it worth while to attempt to deceive me with so palpable a falsehood, Dorothy Greenfield," she said scornfully. Dorothy turned all colors. For once her wits deserted her. She could not imagine how to explain the matter. The whole thing had happened so suddenly that there seemed no time to cudgel up a word in self-defense. A groan of indignation passed round the class, which Miss Tempest instantly suppressed. "Well, what have you to say for yourself, Dorothy? Do you consider such conduct worthy of a girl who was nominated for the wardenship?" "Please, Miss Tempest, may I speak?" said a voice at the back, and Alison Clark stood up, blushing scarlet, but determined to have her say. "Do you know anything about this, Alison?" "Yes, it's my fault. We changed exercise books. The one in Dorothy's book marked fair is really mine, and here is Dorothy's, marked excellent, in my book. If you'll please look at it you'll see it's her own writing. She makes Greek E's, and I never do." Miss Tempest frowned, but she nevertheless examined the exercise, which a row of eager hands passed up to her. "Is this Dorothy Greenfield's writing, Miss Pitman?" she asked. "It certainly has all the characteristics," admitted the form mistress. "Why were you writing in each other's book?" enquired Miss Tempest sharply. Alison's scarlet face took an even deeper shade of crimson. "Oh, just silliness," she murmured. "But it seemed more honest each to take the mark we'd really gained. I couldn't give in excellent when I'd only had fair. Take care such a thing never happens again," said Miss Tempest, eyeing both the culprits, who at that moment would have given a great deal to have been a little less clever. "You will each put down fair in your reports." "So I've lost my excellent comma," lamented Dorothy after school. "Miss Pitman will be rejoicing, I believe she twigged." "I'm almost certain she did, she was looking at you so keenly." "Well, there's one good thing, it will show her that we think she favours. Much she'll care." "Oh, I don't know. No teacher likes to be accused of unfairness. I know one thing, I should have got into an uncommonly big scrape if you hadn't put in a word." "Well, it was much easier for me than for you, as you'd got the excellent dot. But I haven't got it now, worse luck. And probably I shan't have another all this term," groaned Dorothy.